Correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPG, the podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. What's up, Gamer Nation? Welcome back to Me and Steve, and once again, we're down to one Steve because the other Steve had a lot of nerve and went on vacation. So you've only got me. Well, sort of. I do have a guest this week, but before I get to our guest, I want to tell you about our D20 podcast of the week, which is the Genesis Archive, which is a Genesis-based actual play. And their story takes place actually in Las Vegas. And it's I'm going to call it urban fantasy because I don't know a better term for it. But it's a pretty unique blend of a lot of different urban mythology all running around in Las Vegas, where, of course, you can have anything happen because it's Vegas. So you want to check them out? You can find them at anchor.fm/the Genesis Archives, and we'll put a link in the show notes. So, that being said, because Steve is not here this week, and, well, I will sit there and talk to myself, and quite frankly do so a lot, I didn't want to just have you all listen to me talk to myself. So, I got a hold of someone who I figured I could have come on and have a talk around ways to make homebrew items, classes, stuff for your games, but how to do it without causing the infamous power spirals that we talked about a little while ago. So to that end, I'd like to welcome Mr. Brett Bowen to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
So a little bit of background for the rest of you. Brett, at this point, is part of Studio 404 Games, which I believe primarily does stuff for Genesis through the Foundry, but Brett has also worked on a couple of other titles for other publishers, and so he's got a little bit of a background in doing what we're talking about for published material, so I figured he might have some insights that he could share with us to, when I say help us all make things that aren't going to wreck things.
Yes, develop the system without breaking it.
Pretty much, because, look, everybody always wants the next cool new toy. The problem, and look, we've all seen it happen in games, right, is you make the cool new toy, and now you got to make 3 or 4 more cool new toys, because now one person is doing so much better than the other people. And then now you've got 4 cool new toys, and oh crap, now the monsters aren't doing enough cool stuff, and round and round it goes.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one thing when the professionals are doing their own expansion creep because they have an expansion come out and everything is new and shiny and looks like it's so much better, but it takes a while to figure out that it is actually balanced from perhaps a certain point of view or a scenario you haven't seen yet. But from the player's perspective, it's all, ooh, this is so new, and it's totally better than these other things that we had. All these old toys are rotten and dusty. We don't want those anymore. New toys, yes, give us more of those.
Well, as a fan of the Palladium Rifts universe, I dare say there are professionals who don't necessarily pay the most attention to that as well.
It is definitely something that I think has improved over the entire industry since its beginning.
Probably.
I definitely have to say that Rifts, Rifts needs an extra letter in there for expansions.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing world, but I've talked about it before, and look, I don't want to tell anyone that something they like and love is bad. Because I love the world concept, but I've got a stack of books sitting here right next to me, and the power creep, well, it's more than creep. Let's put it that way.
Oh, yes, I'm aware. I remember at one point playing a game where I was just a little like TMNT half animal wizard, and yet somebody else who was from the most latest book was this huge giant person with MDC everything, and there was just didn't seem to be any way that we could really compete with each other. It was just, okay, yes, I can barely do MDC damage, and you're all MDC damage. This is fair somehow.
And yeah, I don't think that, incredible balance is a thing that you have to have, but because it is role-playing games are we'll call it a community event, even if it's just a community of, say, 4 or 5,
Hmm.
You know, the whole thing is that you're all enjoying this together, and especially in a lot of the older games where combat was such a primary focus, or really, if you have any one specific, not even specific, but if you have any one kind of common area you focus on, and one character is much better at that, much more proficient, whatever,
Hmm.
they're going to end up with more of the spotlight. And so now we have, you have Derek and the dominoes instead of four dominoes. And I know
Precisely.
that's not a great analogy, but it was the quickest one I could come up with.
So, as we all know, gaming, or at least the crunchier the game, the more probabilities and statistics come into play. Because if there are dice involved, there's a probability and statistics, and if there are modifiers to those dice, that complicates things even further. So the abilities that modify those are part of that scenario. But we also know that gaming is more art than science after you get away from those core disciplines of the mathematics behind it. The mathematic principles set the basis of the rules that you follow.
Right.
But then the art is how the GM focuses the play, the game. And that's exactly what you're talking about, insofar as if the GM focuses only on combat, then the players that excel are going to be the combat monsters, or the combat focused characters.
Right.
If there's a socialite in there, they might not have the best time because they don't get the same amount of spotlight time. Now, that could be two things. That could be the rules not giving enough crunch or detail into the social or whatever dynamics that are not combat. And therefore, because there isn't as much to buy there, there's no incentive or as much differentiation between a character invested in social versus a character invested in combat. Because with all the various combat options, you have, the two weapon fighter versus the shield fighter versus the archer, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But like, if you only have one little niche of social stuff, then one social character is all you need, potentially.
Yeah. Well, it, goes back to the old classic D&D party that you have a tank, you have a couple of people to do damage, and you have a face.
Hmm. Or classic Shadowrun party for that matter, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and everyone having their specialty is good, but the system can guide the art, but at the same time, the art, the game, the focus of the game can overrule whatever rules are written because they just don't pay attention to them.
Hmm.
And that's a table issue that can only be addressed so much by a writing issue.
Yeah, that's completely fair.
You can bring the horse to water, but you can't make him drink scenario.
Hmm.
You can write all the rules you want, but if nobody actually pays attention to that chapter of the book, then it's like it didn't exist.
Yeah. But to try and swing back around to where, I mean, because, very valid points we're bringing up, but, look, part of the draw, at least for me, with tabletop gaming is because it's so imagination based, and if there isn't something for it, we can just make something for it. And
Hmm.
so, I'm sure it's happened at almost every table that anyone's ever played at. Somehow you end up with a custom item. Or, well, I want to play a kind of like a this, but with this other thing.
Hmm.
And so you end up building these homebrew creations, and most of the time, yeah, they're not bad. But every now and then, just because you missed this thing or that thing, suddenly they end up or three levels down the road, or so many experience points down the road, all of a sudden this thing has turned into a monster, and now it's making it hard for the rest
Right.
of the people at the table to feel like they're playing on the same level. And that's what we kind of want to talk about, how not to get there.
Right. My big advice to start off there. So, moreover, if you're doing this in a game, if you're the GM and you are putting a experimental item or talent or feat or whatever you want to call it, if you are doing some sort of homebrew experimentation with your PCs, the most important thing is to have a little sidebar, whether it's a session zero or before game has actually started. Explain to them this is an experimental item. I have not foreseen all the potential consequences, or I haven't looked at it from the angle of what you're going to be in 5 levels. I haven't looked at the new expansion that's come out or is about to come out, and how those things are going to complicate, if they are added onto your character, the situation that is brought up by the item that I'm giving you. Who knows? Maybe in the book that's about to come out in 2 months, this item is going to become obsolete because this thing that does almost the exact thing we were looking for comes out, and we can just replace it like that. So the important thing first off is to set expectations insofar as this is an experiment. If the experiment goes wrong, we're going to have to change it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in that regard, if you're dealing with something like a talent specifically in Genesis, where the talents all have a particular XP cost, or you rank them by a tier and each tier has a cost, our big recommendation there is to round up. You're going to get a general idea as to where it should be. Round up, go one tier higher, because it's much easier to go down than it is to go up later.
Yeah.
Oh, look, we were wrong about that. Here, have 5 XP back is a lot better than telling somebody you're now in debt for another 20 or so XP.
Yeah.
That's a little bit trickier with items, insofar as there usually isn't really a cost with items. Maybe it has a cost to activate the item, which is very common in Earthdawn, where you might have to pay strain to activate a special ability through your threat item.
Yeah. And another kind of adjacent point to this I've caught myself this way a few times over the years. Remember, if you make some wonderful nasty item for your bad person to use against your party, they will try to figure out how to get it away from your bad person and then have it themselves.
Right. And even if they can't get away from it in certain games, that technology exists. You can do such a thing. Well, we'll retro engineer that and figure it out for ourselves and have it forever, because some people are crafters or artificers or whatever they're called in your particular setting.
Yes.
There's definitely anything you can do, I can do longer scenario there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I know what do you want to say? The one word answer to all of this is playtesting, but that ties into what you were saying about communication. But, a lot of people, look, if you hand them the new toy and say, take it for a test drive, when you go to fiddle with it, if you have to nerf it, they grumble. Then I don't blame them. I would.
Right.
Probably have.
It certainly can happen. The other part of that communication is not just the fact of letting them know ahead of time that it might have to get nerfed or changed or what have you, but also invite them in on the experimentation. This is sort of like an old trick of when you're at the table as a GM and you have a rules lawyer, you can either butt heads with the rules lawyer about how the rules actually work in the middle of the game when everybody else is trying to have a good time, or you make that rules lawyer into the archivist of, I'm having a moment of doubt about how this rule works. Hey, rules lawyer, could you look that rule up for me while I keep the game going?
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, if you have a thing that you are experimenting with, you have the person that you are working with or the entire group all help out trying to figure out how this thing fits well. Because if you're just dealing with the person who has the item, yes, you're going to run into that kind of headbutting or disgruntlement when it has to get nerfed. But if the entire table is involved, there's much more of a community, or perhaps it could even become a voting scenario where everyone gets a say as to how the item turns out. At the very least, it works more into the area of, one thing that I've been learning is that you don't necessarily have to be a master at a setting or a system in order to develop it, but you do need to be an expert. To really develop for a system, you should be an expert in at least 2 different venues or areas of the game. It's extremely hard to be a master of a game, unless it's a very simplistic game. But what I mean by expert here is experts know more than one section of the game particularly well. Being a master is very hard to do, especially if there are expansions coming out. It's just a lot of more material that you have to always keep abreast of. But if you're an expert in 1 or 2 areas, you know all the various implications that item, or playtesting item, we'll call it, or element, might affect those systems. But then the other party member in your team could also be an expert in 1 or 2 other areas of the game, like how to be a cleric or how to be a bard. And therefore, they have a different perspective as to how that playtest item affects their part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
So working in collaboration with the entire group, you get all these perspectives going, and you can probably work out something that works throughout the entire game because you have all those perspectives and experts working together.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you what you meant by, I would say, expert in parts of the game. Did you mean, we'll say the the magic system or the melee combat system or a specific class, or do you have a really good handle on, say, the probabilities of the dice mechanic? Or I was curious what you were defining as an area of the game to be an expert in.
Mostly I'm talking about classes or mechanics because they sometimes go hand in hand, and classes don't exist in every single game. But yeah, I'm really talking about these particular mechanics and how they work. The probabilities, not so much. Probabilities are far more a game designer's area of expertise. As a developer, you need to rely on the fact that the designer has already worked out all the various probabilities. Understanding them kind of helps, but what matters for a developer more is you have to see the cost and benefit ratio of a talent or an ability or an item, and keep that ratio going throughout anything that you create.
Okay.
So if a feat gives you +2 to an attribute, that's your metric, and that's the metric you need to compare any other benefit for the cost of a feat in that particular game. So whatever your playtest thing is, if it's a feat, it needs to somehow compare equally with +2 to an attribute.
Okay.
That's kind of the fun thing. Again, going back to Genesis, is you have the 5 different tiers of talents. You can work out the power level within those 5 tiers, and there are some guidelines in the book about how to do that. And in the end, you're likely going to go, it's somewhere between 2 and 3. And that's why we say round up, make it a 3 until you play test it and work at all the kinks and really get a feel for it and play. And then maybe you can bring it down to 2 because you found out, no, it's actually kind of limiting or limited, and you can bring it back down to 2 and give the character back 5 XP.
Yeah.
To give another example, shortly after FFG put out the Legends of the Five Rings game, I was asked to come down to PAX Unplugged and GM for them. The problem was I hadn't read the latest Legends of the Five Rings game at that point, and I had a month to learn it.
Uh-huh. See, actually, you wouldn't know this as we record this, but the episode immediately preceding this, we were actually talking with Kakita about L5R.
Oh, nice. Excellent. I look forward to hearing about that from an insider point of view. So I would not, because of the fact that I learned how to run the game, but I know very little about how to build a character in that game because I haven't played it except for GMing at cons.
Mm-hmm.
So I really know how to run the game and teach the dice system, and I can read the powers and abilities and stuff like that in a way to explain them to people. But like, I didn't know what the characters had. I just knew how to read their powers in the phrasing that the book used. But I have no idea like where in the book their power came from, or how to rebuild that character from scratch, because I didn't look at any of the character building stuff. I read the core rules, the dice mechanics, how the powers work, how the rounds break down, and stuff like that. So in that regard, I wouldn't consider myself a developer yet because I don't know the cost benefit ratio yet for this level of power gives you this, that level of power gives you that.
Right.
So I still need more research if I'm going to start doing that, but they haven't invited me to do so yet.
Yeah. So what I think the core concept you're trying to bring there with talking about the costing is so to speak error toward the item, talent, whatever being underpowered for its cost, because if you have to give them back something or amplify it, players, and rightly so, are going to be much less grumbly about you making it cheaper or making it better in the future as opposed to turning it down.
Right. Erring on the side of caution will prevent that sort of fallout.
Yes. So that's your kind of first thing, and then including the player or the whole table really.
Mm-hmm.
What else? I mean, are there ways to bench play test, so to speak, for lack of a better term, to kind of stress test creations without putting a full game scenario together? I mean, that's obviously going to be different.
Oh, you mean white rooming?
If that's what it's called?
That's the term I've heard for it. Effectively, you put people in a white room, or sometimes it's called a gray plane. There is no plot. There is, you and this person are in a fight. Go, assuming that you were talking about combat situation or a combat playtest item. It's like, yes, there is nothing other than kill this other person. It is a flat gray plane with no features, no cover, and you have the feeling that you just need to kill this other person to be free of and go back home, or something like that. Or it's just called white rooming, where you're in the characters. There is no other person to really play with. A GM could do this by themselves, and it's a white room because it's a laboratory. You're literally using the characters as lab rats. You're rolling some dice and seeing how things come out, and hoping that you get a broad enough level of experience from those dice results and the scenarios you put them in, that you come up with something that works, or at least that feels right in the end. And then you bring it out of the laboratory and put it on the table and go live. And of course, it won't survive contact with the PCs as standard.
But nothing ever does. So,
Exactly.
and I think to a certain point, that's the difference between RPGs and video games, right? It's because in an RPG or in a video game, you're limited by the constraints of what they're actually able to code, but you're also limited by, for lack of a better word, the imagination of the developer of the code, because if they don't have code there that allows you to do whatever this thing is, you just can't do it. Whereas with an RPG, you just got to say the words, and most of us can do that.
That's true.
And I think that's to me, that's I guess a principle to keep in mind, is that if you're creating something, there are going to be things you didn't think of, that you didn't foresee, that you didn't test out, and that's the way it's always going to be.
Sure.
I'm guessing you've had that, and your partners, whatever, you've all had that happen where you came up with something and then you go to actually test it out and someone does something else with it and you went, oh crap, I never thought of that.
Right. And that's a funny thing that only recently, really, past 10 years or so, has been a big change in the RPG industry. For video games, for the longest time, especially online, say MMOs, oh, this isn't balanced, and we can run live testing while people are playing it and see all the various numbers come up, and yep, that class is doing way too much damage. Add a little patch, and it's fixed. It's do a patch, and these people now are complaining about getting nerfed, but at least things are in some form of balance by the devs' point of view.
Right.
RPGs didn't have that luxury because they were printing physical books. Or I recall somebody pointing out the fact of when 3.5 D&D came out, I think it was 5 years after 3.0 came out. It wasn't long.
Yeah.
Or at least it wasn't long in comparison to the difference between D&D 2 versus D&D 3.
Oh, God,
And my friend pointed out the fact of, and that difference in years was brought to you by the internet, with all the various communications that were possible with forums and whatnot that happened because of 3.0. They got all this feedback and all this errata and everything put together and rolled it out into 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
Now they kept that going when they stopped 4th and decided to go do D&D next, and eventually came up with 5. They had a lot of community contributions and testing and stuff like that in order to keep that going. And that leads us to today with the DMs Guild and the Foundry and all the other community content places that are now allowing us to put out our own content. And because we're just electric, we can do updates, not exactly live, but we get feedback and we can do, like, I remember I put up an update for Studio 404 and somebody bought it immediately, was looking through it and caught one of the icons for the dice was wrong. And they messaged us on Facebook and said, hey, I found this little problem. And I happened to be online, fixed it, uploaded another version of the file, and nobody else was the wiser for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of thing is an ability that hasn't been possible in RPGs before. That level of accessibility to the devs and the response time of the devs and being able to get it back out into people's hands. As much as those gamers of a certain age may really hold on to their physical copies, and I understand because I've been whittling down my collection over the past couple of years, partially because I moved twice in 3 years, and packing it all up and then displaying it again and packing it all up kind of got a little old. So I stopped collecting physical copies because also the physical copies have errors in them. And then errata comes out and the PDFs are accurate.
It's a point I hadn't actually considered because I'm much more of a physical book person. I just, for whatever reason, I find them easier to read.
Oh, they absolutely are. I have this weird issue of if I physically read a physical book, because I'm such a slow reader, I'm memorizing the entire experience as I go. I know roughly where in the book that particular section is and can turn to it relatively quickly after I've read the entire book. I don't get that kind of physical memory from a PDF, but the PDF has all the fixes.
Yeah.
My most recent horror story in that regard was Shadowrun 6th edition. Thanks to FFG and working for them to run Legend of the Five Rings for them, I was able to get out to Gen Con 2019. And sure enough, when I had some time off, I ran over to the Catalyst area and picked up a couple copies of 6th edition that had just hit the shelves.
Yeah, that released at that show, didn't it?
Correct. And I was lucky to get the copies that I got for me and my friends to bring back home. Here's the thing. The copy of the book that I got came with a little card that said, here's a code to download a free version of the PDF. And then the
Mhm.
next day, a document was released that included about 9 pages of errata.
Yeah, that's a lot, especially at that stage, in my opinion. But
Yep. And that's the problem. From a certain point of view, that meant the books that I had just bought and now had to carry all the way home were paperweights because they had incorrect rules in them.
yeah,
Whereas the PDF that I got the free download of because I bought the physical book was updated and accurate.
yeah,
And then they rolled out 2 more updates over the next couple months.
yeah. I do like PDFs in some regard. Some of it also because, and not every publisher does this, and the one I'm going to point at because I've talked about it on the show. And I don't know if you've had a chance to read this, Brett, but Cyberpunk Red,
Mhm.
the linking in that PDF is so comprehensive. Anytime it references a page number or a section, click the text and you jump to that section.
Yes.
And then you click the page header and it takes you back to the index.
Hmm.
And combined with that and a decent search function, if a PDF is taken care of that way, it is incredibly useful. And I think some of it too comes from some of my early experiences with PDFs, we'll say, were some of the random internet finds that were literally scans of really old books that were never released in digital.
Yep.
And so at that point there is no now you can, there are programs that will let you go in and you can actually link them all up yourself, but I don't know about you, I don't have time to do that to a file that is already done.
Since learning InDesign to make my first Genesis hack was Earthdawn Genesis. And I taught myself not just how to develop for Genesis, but also how to use InDesign and do all the various artwork and layout and stuff like that that comes along with it, including eventually the interactivity, which is what you're talking about, the bookmarks, the links, and all that sort of thing. And then when we started up Studio 404 Games, I was the person that knew how to do the layout and therefore have done all the layout for all of our products so far.
Huh.
Since doing that, any product that I buy, I have strong opinions about their interactivity. To wit, you had Shane on a couple of episodes ago,
Mhm.
and I've joined him and his crew playing Villains and Vigilantes.
Mhm.
And I took a look at their PDF, and such a for such a big book that had very obvious chapter points, they have the sort of scientific manual where it's chapter 1.0, then some chapter 1.1 until it's like 4 digits long.
Mhm.
You finally get to chapter 2, but they had no interactivity, no bookmarks or anything like that. So because I have all the tools to do so, I added in the bookmarks in order to make it a much more functional research device.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's how I've been dealing with my opinions about interactivity now.
Yeah, well, see, now, especially, I want to learn how to use, be it InDesign or Affinity Publisher or one of those.
Hmm.
But, well, see, I do the whole adult work thing. I just run out of time too much. You know what I mean?
I have heard that time is linear and it has a infinite lifespan.
Well, see, here's the thing. I keep looking on eBay for blue phone booths or DeLoreans, and they all go for ridiculous amounts of money.
Yep. Neat trick about that, though. I don't believe only the DeLorean allows you to overlap your own timeline.
Aha. Oh my. But yeah, that is an interesting point you bring up, though. Going back to where we were before we kind of ran off down that tangent, was that given the current digital age of publication, if you will, that, it's possible for publishers to now go back in and fix things even if they released it a little prematurely. So
hmm
maybe as players we should be a little more understanding when, the DM that we play with all the time, and, he has, in addition to all the other stuff he does in his life or her life or their life, however you want to say it,
hmm
they also take the time to prepare this game for you to play, and maybe they don't get it right the first time. So, if they tell you, hey, I made you this thing, but it may not be 100% right, so please, we may have to tweak it down the road. Please be understanding.
Right, and that also plays a bit more back into to my offered solution, which is make it a team effort because the GM is responsible for enough already.
Yeah.
Like, especially if you're working on something to fix a class or a feature, you're just tweaking something that already exists, as opposed to making up a whole item, whole cloth to give to a player. It's just, this ability doesn't look quite right. Let's tweak it this way, and I think that'll work better. That's affecting one person, but everybody should be on the lookout for how that changes the dynamic of the entire table.
Yeah. And I don't know, tell me if I'm wrong here. And this is to kind of to move maybe to another point on how to do this, but don't be afraid to just reskin something. Just because you want I don't know, a gorilla that's got a hawk head on it doesn't mean you can't use an owlbear stats and tell him it looks like a gorilla with a hawk head on it. And I know that's pretty samey, but the point I'm trying to get to is, look, steal and reskin,
Absolutely.
especially for your home table. No one's gonna care, even if they do figure it out.
hmm I've been running some testing for the new setting that we're working on, Anarchy in Dragon City, which is sort of a mashup between Shadowrun and Rifts and probably a couple of other things. But one bit of feedback that I was getting was a summoner class that I put together was able to summon a bear, and I used the common bear stats from the system, and they seemed I got a lot of feedback saying the bear was too powerful and the bear was kind of stealing the show. And I've been thinking since then that I should probably just lower the bear stats, but still call it a bear.
Yeah. But yeah, and I guess I would say that, that probably even works with items, classes, whatever, a little maybe less so with classes because people are going to go, this is the same as a ranger. But you know what I mean? But especially for monsters, yeah, just put the pig in a different dress.
Right. Especially if you are playing in a system that doesn't have a whole large collection of monsters yet, reskinning is key. Really just look for, to a certain degree, ignore the numbers, look for the special abilities that you want to use, and then reskin around that.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing that I'm actively doing on Discord all the time is called the Earthdawn West Marches, where we run a Earthdawn game, living community. People come in, they build a character, and they create a rumor. That rumor gets picked up by a GM. They work out a schedule to play the game, and then a bunch of other players sign up for that particular game. Person who started the rumor gets to choose who's going with them on the adventure, and then they have a great time. One of our GMs is notorious for taking the monsters that we do have access to from the books and reskinning it to suit the theme of the adventure, because that's a great way to keep the monster challenge rating within the realm of the PCs where they are, without using the same monsters all the time, because we don't have a great, huge breadth of monsters to pull from yet.
Mm-hmm.
But just reskinning what they look like throws off the expectations of the players, and they don't know it's that creature type until they use their special ability kind of thing. And even then, there's that little seed of doubt of like, well, how much more did he change?
Yeah. Or, you keep it the same skin, but you use a different stat block for it. Really throw them for a loop.
Yep. Well, that also gets into like, well, they're all lizardmen, but that lizardman is the lieutenant and he has levels added onto him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's lots of stuff. Like I guess, like I said, that's to me that's the wonderful thing about gaming. And for a long time when I primarily played, I actually almost made it a point to not read books because the way my head works, I accidentally memorize all kinds of useless, irrelevant information to normal life. Like I've told some people, I said I know more useless crap that wouldn't ever even come up on Jeopardy. You know? So as a player, part of me wants to maintain that what do you want to call it? That innocence in character where, yeah, I'll try this thing because
Hmm.
it seems like the right thing in the moment, even if from a meta perspective, if you have the knowledge, you go, well, that wouldn't be good. Well,
Right. Yeah, I'm completely there with you. Partially because of how I got my start in D&D. My first character was a character that I made up at summer camp at one point, and he was killed by a harpy because the harpy kept using their song. And if I covered my ears, I wasn't affected by the song, but then I couldn't attack. And if I took my hands away to attack, I'd be affected by the song. So how am I supposed to deal with this scenario? If I had read the monster stats, maybe I would have known how to deal with that.
yeah.
And it also comes back to, so one thing that I keep sort of quizzing people on because it's so ingrained in the gamer culture at this point. How did you first learn that trolls don't regenerate fire damage? Did you learn it in play? Or did you learn it by reading the rule book or by reading a novel that included that bit of, like a D&D novel book that included that bit of trivia in there?
I'm going to say I probably got it from Table Talk, to be honest.
Okay, that's also valid, but it was table talk that was, not in character.
Yes.
Right. So if that's almost as good as reading the book.
Yeah, basically.
As opposed to learning it the old-fashioned way of in play when you're trying to kill a troll and he will not stay down
Mm-hmm.
until you happen to whip out the torch and burn him to death, or maybe the mage got happy with a fireball early. So that's just my little acid test of how do you find these things out, and is the mystery still there?
Yeah. Yeah. I see, I think too, maybe that's part of why I tend toward, what do you want to say, a little bit less common. I don't want to say common, but like the first campaign I ever really played in
Mhm.
was a very, well, with the topic of the show, let's just call it a very homebrewed 5th edition Call of Cthulhu Delta Green.
Okay.
Back in, this would have been the mid 90s, so it was the Pagan Publishing Delta Green still run in Call of Cthulhu. And I mean, we encountered, well, we would run into Agents Mulder and Scully fairly often. We had encounters with predators, Daleks, just kind of whatever our GM thought would be cool.
Sure. Monster sort of situation.
And like it was a really neat campaign, but I think to a certain point, maybe because that was so, what do you say, non-typical, that had really formed a lot of what I look for in a game, in that, I want to not use the cliched options, and I'll sometimes stress myself out trying to avoid them.
Right. Yeah, that is a definitely a issue that I have run into as a developer and writer, in the fact of I want to do something unique. There's very little unique. Kind of everything has been done before. You can't plagiarize at the same time, but it's really hard to come up with something absolutely unique and interesting and engaging with the players and stuff like that. So it is an excellent goal to have, but it is extremely hard to pull off.
Yeah. Um, so do you have any more points on this? I know we've kind of tangented off this, that, and the other thing, but it was all somewhat relevant.
The other big thing that I'll bring up, because I keep touting on it, I mean, I was a communications major, so I'm going to keep on touting good communication is kind of key, especially in the fact of we've just gone through a pandemic. I'm sure everyone has been gaming online in some fashion or another. Online manners will get you very, very far in developing, writing up stuff, playing with your own teammates. I fully believe that I got my first gig with FASA to help develop Earthdawn because of my polite online manner. We were asking a lot of questions when we started up the West Marches game to try to play the game as rules as written as possible and do it as fairly across multiple GMs and multiple players and stuff like that. So we need to understand the rules as well as possible. So I asked a lot of questions. There were lots of people asking lots of questions. Not all of them were very polite about it. And that burgeoned into a relationship with myself and Morgan Weeks, who is the head developer. And from there, I eventually got brought in to help with Mystic Pass.
Ah,
One other thing I learned from being the rules head from Earthdawn West Marches is that when you bring up an example to someone about how something works or how something should be played out, important element is to remove the word you from the example. As soon as you start saying you, it is accusatory, or it is much more into the person's personal sphere or bubble, and they can take it much more personally because the word you is in there. That's all. If you make it them, or for Earthdawn, we keep on saying the adept does this thing, that makes it much more topic neutral, and it's much less likely to offend somebody because it's not them.
That's a valuable little tip there.
And being that not only are you possibly playing or working with your other players, if you're working online with a development team of any sort, you're likely typing at them more than you're actually audibly talking with them. So keeping a mind to the tone of your words as well as possible is very important in a medium that completely lacks it.
Yes. And especially like I know for me in real life, I have a rather dry sense of sarcasm, and that is terrible on the internet.
Yes. Uh, I think that is a very common trait amongst gamers. And when it's a shared quote, like if we were to sarcastically quote various movies from our past, like say Ghostbusters or Pulp Fiction, stuff like that, generally speaking, that's going to go over okay, so long as they somehow understand that it's a quote.
Right. But yeah, context is so hard to get right in internet communication. It
Right.
really is.
And further, to go one step further, once you're done with the development and it goes out live, then you have to start talking with feedback and fans and people who are giving you hopefully constructive feedback to the work that you've done. And that's when you start needing to keep that civil tone in any responses that you give. And you're very likely going to need to start building up a thicker skin to take all that feedback well.
Good advice. So I kind of intended to have you do this a little bit more off the top, but before we get into game of the week, which we always end the show with, do you want to take a minute to talk about, you've mentioned some of the various work you've done. Do you want to talk about that? Talk about Studio 404 a little bit? Any of that stuff?
Sure, thanks. Studio 404 Games is a producer of top shelf products that we are mostly putting out on the Foundry, but we've also put out material on the Chronicle System Guild. We were able to get in on the launch of that in the summer of 2020. We just recently released two products in 2021, Legrick and Larceny, which was a system I put together and tested and very much trial by fire as a way to run heist encounters without GM PC adversariality, because the adversarial GMing is one of my big hot buttons of do not do this. But adversarial playing is also a factor as well. And if you have both at the same time, it will just escalate and become a big mess. By using the rules in Legrick and Larceny, hopefully you can keep everything upfront on the table and everybody is understanding how things are going to be playing out. That does not mean that there aren't surprises. It just means that you can see the fact that this surprise costs something on the side that just sprung the surprise. So it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was, no, we paid a cost to have that surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that surprise was a trap from the GM side or a sudden development of an item that they completely and totally prepped, yesterday, don't you know, when we didn't play that yesterday. But that's very much a fun factor of Genesis, is being able to introduce those narrative situations.
Yeah. Well, and it has the story point mechanic, which helps facilitate that at the very least.
Correct. And I created the legwork talent to enhance the story point mechanic in that regard.
Aha.
We also put out Mechasys, which is developing I like to think of it as a very unique system for how to build and run mecha encounters or campaigns within a Genesis game. Essentially, you're given a pool of points to build out your mecha with. Mecha have their own characteristics that combine with the pilot's characteristics in order to figure out what your pool is. So it plays very much like a hybrid character vehicle, if you're familiar with the Genesis rules.
That sounds cool, because mecha can be so tricky to do.
They are, and they can be. But once you have down the vehicle rules, which are not the simplest thing compared to the rest of Genesis, the force movement took a little getting used to. But once you have a handle on that, and that's sort of a pun there, once you have a handle on the vehicle rules, the rest of it falls into place. The big thing to keep in mind is when you're laying out the scene and the map to make it bigger. because all the mecha characters are so big that you have to and are moving at such a speed that they can cover a very large distance in very little time. So you are much more commonly dealing with things at long, extreme, and even strategic ranges than you would in a normal game.
Uh-huh.
And as I mentioned before, we are still working on, and we've teased on the Cannibal Halfling blog where we got a review of Mechasis, the Anarchy in Dragon City setting that we've been working on for the past year or so. Originally, I wanted it to come out late 2020, sort of in tandem with Cyberpunk 2027, but a certain pandemic happened and creativity was a little harder to find.
Fair.
I'm also in the process of working with FASA Games to make a couple of products there. One is an expansion on the magical spells and other magical tricks that magicians can bring to bear. I'm forgetting what the released name of that is. And unfortunately, the other one I can't share because of NDA right now. But that one is going to be my first writing title.
Aha.
As opposed to just developer.
Aha. Well, pre-congratulations then.
Thank you.
Even though I can't know what it's about. All right. So now does Studio 404 or yourself or both have websites, etc. people can go to?
Yep. Studio404games.com is how you can find all of us. It has links to all of our products that are on DriveThru RPG. Of particular interest because of our topic tonight, I would recommend also looking at the setting notebook. If you're looking to make any setting specifically in the Genesis system, the setting notebook is a pay what you want title that I put together with all the various tools that Phil and I have used in the past to make settings. It's all form fillable and can do some of the math for like when you're creating archetypes and you want to make sure that all the XP costs for the archetypes line up pretty close to each other. We specifically recommend within 10 XP of each other within that setting. You would want to total everything up. However you do that particular math, do it equally among all of them. And it also has a checklist of all the published talents in the Genesis books. So you can say, this talent exists in our setting, that talent does not.
Very nice. I've been meaning to go pick that up because I have something I want to start working on whenever I'm not doing all the other things I'm doing.
I've heard that more commonly than you might think.
Oh, I don't doubt it. And I know it sounds like a broken record, but damn, it's just life, you know?
Mm-hmm. The best flattery that I've gotten from the setting notebook so far was somebody had started putting together their own setting, shared it with everybody, and it was a couple of the pages from the setting notebook that he had made all the various changes onto for everyone to look at.
Mm-hmm.
So like, hey, I recognize that page because it's very identifiable.
And so you're saying you've got people using that for projects they intend to put out on the Foundry, you're saying, not even just, private table stuff.
Possibly. I don't know what their end goals are precisely, but I know that it's being downloaded a lot. Some people are paying for it, which is always great. And of course, if you download it for free, you can always go back and if you like it, you can put some money into it after the fact and essentially buy it again for actual money as opposed to free the first time. And it all goes into the same pot.
Very cool. Very cool.
As of yet, I have made sure to update it every time a new setting book comes out. And I know that Edge Studios has released that Twilight Imperium is on the way. So once I have that, I'll likely be updating the setting notebook again to include those talents.
Very cool. Yeah, I was going to say that's supposed to drop. Didn't the little thing they put out said what, early summer or late spring or something? So like any time now?
That sounds right, but I'm not sure.
Well, again, pandemic, I'm sure, throws wrenches in lots of plans. So
right.
We'll get it when we get it, and we'll wait until then because we don't have another choice. But as you pointed out, because it's a digital thing, and
right.
I know DriveThru does this. If you've bought a PDF through DriveThru, you can go back and re-download it again. They'll usually send you notifications if the publisher updates the file.
Right.
And so, yeah, we'll probably try to put a link to at least maybe like an authorship link or something. Somehow we can figure out a way to do it to highlight your stuff in the show notes for DriveThru. And, full disclosure, yes, we do use a DriveThru affiliate code. So if you buy stuff through the links, yeah, we get a little tiny kickback from DriveThru and credit there because we're sending traffic their way.
Entirely.
But for anyone out there listening who goes, all this, look, it doesn't cost you anything more. DriveThru just gives us a little tiny percent in store credit, and we use that, like, if we're going to buy something for reviews or anything like that, or we're hoping down the road to do some more actual plays, and we'll try to use that to if people wanting to participate don't have copies of the rules, to use that to get them copies of the rules, that kind of thing. We're not trying to fleece anybody for anything.
Yeah, affiliate links are entirely a deal between the affiliate person and DriveThru RPG. DriveThru is essentially paying credit, as you say, to the affiliate for bringing traffic to their site. There's
Right.
no cost to the click-througher.
If you'd like to, it's a little way you could support the show a little bit, is if you follow the links we put in the show notes to DriveThru. We get a little tiny bit of credit for it. That's all. But anyway, with all that said, Brett, I know you listen to the show, so do you want to do Game of the Week?
Absolutely.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right. So am I going to go first, or are you going to go first?
I mean, host's privilege.
Okay.
So your choice.
Okay. Well, I have something called up, and so hopefully it's not what you were planning on using, because in traditional form, we have not informed each other of our choices.
Right.
So everyone's probably played the classic dungeon crawl where you leave the village and you go to the dungeon and you fight the monsters and so on. It's pretty standard early gaming experience. Well, what about if you started as the monster in the dungeon and went in and raided the town? So my game of the week this week is a game called A Wicked One. Particularly, it's the deluxe edition. What it is, it's a Forged in the Dark game. So similar mechanics to Blades in the Dark, Band of Blades, Scum and Villainy, and assorted other titles, all based on, John Harper's work on Blades in the Dark. But this takes your classic, dungeon delve scenario and turns it upside down. You get to play the fantasy monsters building a dungeon, launching raids on the surface to gather a horde, and your assorted plans, along with pillaging, rituals, concoctions, contraptions, and all sorts of building traps, all kinds of fun stuff. So, like I said, it's literally the classic trope turned around. And the PDF for the deluxe edition is $20. There is a free edition listed in the listing.
Not suitable for those under 13.
Yes, it does say that. So, yeah, that is something to keep in mind. It may not be suitable if you have youngsters at the table. But, yeah, they're saying, it's got tools to build dungeons, flexible spell system, ritual magic, 9 different monster playbooks, different themes for dungeons, some sandboxes for you to kind of start with. It really looks like maybe not something you'd want to play for years and years and years, but it could certainly be something to do for 3 or 4 sessions and have a blast with.
Mm-hmm. As some apparently monster archetypes, you got brain eaters and doom seekers, face stealers, and gold mongers. I mean, those just sound awesome.
Well, like I said, I'm a fan of any time you take an idea and turn it upside down.
Mm-hmm. The premise reminds me of an old video game, Dungeon Keeper, that I enjoyed a lot back in the 90s.
I've played it, whether I played it on PC or on my phone, I don't remember. But yeah, I was thinking that reading this, it kind of feels somewhat inspired by that at the least.
The art looks really good too. The art and layout looks good, which I've become used to from Blades in the Dark books.
Yeah.
Their layout is very nice.
Yeah, now it looks like, can't tell if this is it says it's from Bandit Camp, so I don't know if it's actually done, if it's full-blown Evil Hat endorsed. They have a very open SRD OGL kind of thing going.
Right.
But I did notice that the print-on-demand version is in the 6x9 format, which Evil Hat is so fond of. It's a big book, too. 360 pages.
Yeah, but I'm not seeing a preview for it, so I can't look inside it.
Well, you could download the free edition, look at it that way.
Sure.
But yeah, like I said, that looks like something I might pick up just for funsies every now and then.
Mm-hmm. The Blades in the Dark was a big inspiration for Legwork and Larceny, so I'm a big fan of the system.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically enough, I tried Apocalypse World, specifically Monster of the Week, that came out for that system, and it didn't really jive with me very well. But a lot of the side mechanics of Blades in the Dark I really like. And so the legwork in Larceny was me adapting those mechanics into Genesis.
I kind of had gotten that impression. I think you and I had talked a little previously about it.
Mhm.
But yeah, my understanding is a lot of people say that the Blades in the Dark's implementation of heists is really, really, really good. I
Agreed.
haven't had a chance to read it. I have a copy of Band of Blades sitting over here, but I don't have Blades in the Dark yet.
As part of the research for it, JT Domino helped us out by running a game for us. And then some folks over at DFW RPG included Kimber and I in an online streaming game of Blades in the Dark, just so we could get our hands on it and get some experience.
Cool. All right. So,
So, in counterpoint to that, I also want to do a bit of a shout out to Sin Nomine Publishing, because thanks to them and their free art pack for Stars Without Number, Starcana, and several of other products had some amazing art to put inside of them. And they came out back in April 2021 with their fantasy version, Worlds Without Number. And I am very
okay.
curious to see how this plays out, because as opposed to being sci-fi spacefaring, it is more classical fantasy role-playing.
Okay.
And who knows, maybe they'll have a nice art pack to download at some point afterwards as well. This looks like it has some classic swords and sorcery heroes, world building tools to make your own world within the system, adventure creation tools, and faction rules for fantasy worlds.
Very nice.
So it's been out for not quite a month and a half as of this recording. It's already a Mithril seller, and it's going for $20. That said, Stars Without Number had a free version that didn't have artwork in it at some point, so maybe Worlds Without Number will do similarly. Oh wait, yep, here we go. There is a free edition of the game.
Ah, yes.
There we go. So yes, there is a free version of Worlds Without Number as well, likely without quite so much art in it. So you can check it out before you go spending $20 to really see it in full glory.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things, specifically about Stars Without Numbers. I know there's somebody on our server who's running a Genesis game, kind of with Stars Without Numbers mashed into it. But yeah, I think you're seeing these things where some of these indie publishers have they put out one thing and be it a sci-fi context, and then they put out, in this case, a fantasy companion, or the other one that I just looked at it yesterday and somebody brought it up on the Discord. Sean Tompkin, the guy that did Ironsworn, has a sci-fi one out now, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. Starforged or Starsworn or something like that.
Okay.
But last I looked, his Kickstarter's going pretty darn crazy for what he was doing. But again, it's kind of like this, where they put out one and it was so well received, so they went into the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's always cool when people do that.
Well, that's also part of the market. Fantasy is definitely the biggest one, but sci-fi is not very far behind it, to my understanding. So any publisher should make a setting that plays to both of those. Admittedly, you could be an expert in sci-fi or fantasy, but you're leaving some amount of clientele on the table if you only do one.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, some systems really only work for some setting.
Yes.
And it can be very difficult to extricate the systems and move them over to another setting, which is, again, why I'm really a fan of generic systems.
Well, I think, too, we're blessed in that right now in the industry, we've got a number of really good systems that were designed as generic. You've got Genesis, you've got Savage Worlds, you've got Cortex,
GURPS, Heroes,
Cypher,
yep.
And I'm not going to say for all of them, but most of these were designed as a generic framework to then be skinned as whatever, as opposed to being designed as a fantasy system or a sci-fi system and then skinned as the other or multiples. And that can make a huge difference.
Absolutely.
We could, and I don't want to start in on a D&D bash because, hey, there's a lot of people who love it. I've had a lot of fun playing it, but it's not my system of choice at this point in my life. But I will say I think that game engine starts falling down when you take it out of a fantasy context.
I've had the chance to play a little bit of, I keep forgetting the number, but there's a cyberpunk setting called Carbon
2185.
That's it, 2185. That is pretty good. It still uses the 5e mechanics, but they've changed the classes around enough and the gear that it works pretty well so far as I've seen. The big issue that I have with it is apparently the guy who wrote it was an economics expert.
Mm-hmm.
And he extrapolated that the big part of the cyberpunk feel is that everything costs a fortune to buy. So it's extremely difficult to get gear with starting cash, or really even after a couple of adventures and missions, you're going to have trouble affording anything. And they even talk about renting your guns. Like, you can buy ammunition, no problem, but buying a gun is really hard. You can rent a gun just so you can use the ammunition that you bought, no problem.
You know what? I mean,
It's
I appreciate it. It depends. See, Cyberpunk's a setting where I think you have a lot of very different takes on it, and we
Yeah.
could do a whole show on that. For lack of, there are people who like their Cyberpunk like Shadowrun with magic. Then there are people like me who like their Cyberpunk like Cyberpunk 2020. And there are yet other types of, do you focus more on the cyber, more on the punk, more on, you know what I mean? There's so many different takes on that, and yeah, but the dystopian aspect, that's an interesting take on it, is that, oh yeah, you can rent the gun, which then, if you want to take ballistics into account, now that becomes a whole nother thing.
right.
But yeah, we could talk for hours, and well, given the fact that we had an hour-long conversation before we started recording, I think you could end up chatting for an extremely long time if we don't wrap this up.
Yeah, I think it might be better to find the author of that and talk to him about the economics of why he chose that method.
Yeah.
I would look forward to that episode because I'm curious why he made those decisions and what the basis of the logic behind it is.
Dragon Turtle Games, maybe, to put that out.
Yep, Dragon Turtle Games, very good.
I think I have this because I think they did a thing not at some point where they put it up for free, and I snagged one
Mhm.
because Cyberpunk is one of the things that it's a setting that I like, right?
Yep.
And I went, well, I'm going to grab it because it's free, but it's $19 on DriveThru right now, so I don't know what they were doing, if it was just something they felt like doing, whatever, but they may have been promoting an expansion or something, I think.
Well, also the sci-fi sale is going on right now, so it's bumped down by DriveThru.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and by the time people hear this, it probably won't be.
Correct. It's ending tomorrow.
Yeah, no, so definitely, because yep, not going to happen. All right, well, so any parting contact information, anything like that for you?
Big thing is to keep being creative, keep working with each other, and we have the power gamers.
Alrighty. Well, with that then, I'd like to remind you all, we've got all our contact information for the show down in the show notes, be it email, Facebook, Twitter, etc. We have a Discord server, so you can stop by and holler at us there. I spend entirely too much time active on there, but, it works. But with that, we want to remind you to be kind to each other and go play some RPGs.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/meandsteverpg. Thank you, and be kind to each other.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
I'm trying to think of what else to cover. I'm also going over NDA stuff real quick. Hang on.
Yeah, yes. Anything that you can talk about.
Okay.